Line's good.
Never on.
Whoa.
Hard. Hardly.
Come on, Brent.
Line's good.
Got real close.
I hear high, right?
Try and hit 2/3.
Have they saved it for her? Yes, they have.
Welcome to Game of Stones, everybody. I am Sean Graham Scott, physically distancing as always, but tonight, physically distancing so much that even a virtual call was too much. That's how physically distanced Scott wanted to be for this week's intro, because on this week's episode, we are going to run the audio of a really fun live stream that we did on Thursday afternoon with our friends from Rocks Across the Pond, Ryan and Jonathan. And if you've been following along with us over the course of the summer, one of our Monday live streams that we did with those guys was pitching ideas for curling movies. And we had a lot of fun with it. It was great to get some of your ideas and responses to that little fun pitch session that we did. But we thought it'd be better if we went to a professional. And fortunately, Jonathan is friends with a professional screenwriter. So he was nice enough to come on, listen to our ideas, let us know what could work, what couldn't work. And eventually, I think we got to the point where we are going to legitimately submit an idea to the National Film Board, which has challenged us to do so. So we were really pleased this afternoon to speak with Faisal Lutchmedial. He is a film writer and a screenwriter who lives in Toronto. He most recently wrote on Endings, which is a CBC show also available through Hulu. Also wrote on Ransom on CBS and Global. And he's currently developing a sci-fi action series with Netflix in the Canadian Film Centre Development Accelerator Program. So this is somebody who actually knows something about screenwriting and getting things produced, unlike the four of us who are just throwing out ideas. So we pitch our ideas to Faisal. He lets us know what is good, what is not good. It was a really fun afternoon. So without any further ado, let's get right to it. All right, we are live from everywhere, from Ottawa, Montreal, Richmond, Virginia, and Toronto. Special guest today, Faisal. You are a screenwriter, and you are here to tell us how terrible our curling movie ideas are. Or maybe there might be a good one. I don't know.
Well, hopefully I'll help you be able to also help you elevate them into not terrible ideas.
Yes, hopefully. So before we get into some of these ideas, I wanted to ask you, because you are a screenwriter, you know how these things are supposed to work. So what is the key to creating a good movie and creating a good script? Like, how much is it the idea, the original idea, versus, say, the dialogue?
Well, it's a hard question to answer for what makes a good screenplay. Like if you're just looking at just the screenplay, because there's so much that happens between when it's a screenplay to when it gets actually made and then put to screen. But I think, to answer your question, I guess the idea is really important. Having a unique, interesting concept is great. But in my opinion, that's only the very, very first step. It's the actual fleshing out that idea and creating something interesting that is unique in all of its elements. I think that's really that's the hard part. That's where you're making something that people are going to take notice of.
So basically, you can have a really good idea that you ruin through a bad script.
Absolutely.
Like,
yeah, absolutely. I've seen it. You've probably seen it 100 times. There's lots of films where you're like, oh, wait, that sounds like a really great idea. And then you watch it and it's not, it's terrible. And sometimes this happens too. It's more rare where there's a concept that seems ordinary. You're like, oh, well, I heard that. I feel like I've seen that film before. But then you watch it and you're like, oh, this was actually really engaging. And it's, it could be because of a host of different things.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a Star Wars fan, so I've seen the script ruin the concept 6 times.
Well, so that's what I want to ask though is like, why does so much stuff that to me like Star Wars that can feel so formulaic, like why does that tend to get made?
Well, I mean, let's first be frank. Like that's a whole different level than where I'm at. So that's kind of Star Wars money is way beyond me. But I can say that when things are made, and especially I think as the budget levels increase, is that there are more people in between giving you notes and trying to add their voice into what's going on. And things tend to become more formulaic because of that. And it doesn't necessarily mean the case that that's going to be what happens, but because there's so much money and so much money is at stake, I feel like big production companies, distributors, etc., they'll generally make the safe choice, right? So it's because they're worried if they're putting $250 million, let's say, into a movie on top of a marketing cost. Then you're like, we got to make the safest movie possible because we don't want it to be, we don't want it to bomb. We don't want it to, to lose so much money. So I think that that's probably the biggest reason.
Okay. That's why bands don't make experimental albums anymore, except for Kanye.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah, good. Well, he has FU money, so like it doesn't matter.
So
right?
he can make experimental albums.
Yeah.
So now you've written a lot of stuff for Canadian audiences. Do you think that curling as an idea lends itself to interesting movie ideas, not only for a Canadian audience, but perhaps for an international audience as well?
Okay, so for again, admission is that I know very little about curling, so I find it hysterical that I'm part of this podcast. Although I've known Jonathan for quite many years, but I think that anything, like any interesting subject matter, especially a subject matter that a lot of people don't know a lot about, I think that can make a very compelling film, because it's, the actual mechanics of anything, like any kind of sports film, the mechanics of the sport are very rarely the most interesting part of a sports movie. Right? I mean, if you think of any sports movie for any subject, it's rarely like, oh wow, do you see him, hit that home run or score that goal or make that hoop? It's like maybe that's the climax and you see that moment, but it's that person that threw that ball or shot that puck or hit that ball. So it's like that's the more important thing, and what it means to them and what it means to their family, let's say, or their loved ones and all the people around them. It's like that's, I think, really much more important. And so curling, well, why not? It's interesting. It's kind of, a lot of people don't understand it. They may not know the rules, but they've maybe seen it at the Olympics. Like it's got, especially depending on what country you're at, right? So I think that there's a lot of, I think that it could lend itself to a really interesting film.
Would curling have worked if they had replaced dodgeball with curling in the movie Dodgeball?
I haven't seen it, so I can't tell you that.
I was thinking the exact same thing, Ryan. I was like, I want to make dodgeball, but with curling.
Isn't that called Men with Brooms?
Yeah.
An old guy who used to be really good at the sport is coming back with the younger guys as like a redemption story. Isn't that basically the same movie?
Well, so are you saying that dodgeball copied Men with Brooms?
They just cut out the astronaut sister love triangle thing, and yeah, it's the same movie.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. All right, so we have some ideas of curling-based movies that we're going to run by you, that we're going to pitch. Okay. And given your experience, not only as a screenwriter, but also in just getting things developed, you can tell us how likely it is that this is a feasible idea. And if at the end of our time, we have an idea that is mildly feasible, I will fill out all the forms for the National Film Board and send it in to see what they say, because they have challenged us to do so, and I will not just let that. I will just not let that pass. Right? I will
Challenge accepted is what you're saying.
bring it on, NFB. You don't scare me. So all right. So who wants to go first? Who?
Well, actually, you know what? Before we go on, I just want to clarify what feasible means. Because
We're defining
feasible can be a lot of different things. Yeah. So what in your mind, what does feasible mean?
Something that a group like the National Film Board would give us money for.
Okay.
Could conceivably want to pay to produce.
All right,
Okay.
so mine is out.
I saw what yours was, and yeah, maybe. But you should pitch it anyway. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll keep in mind, let's say a Canadian budget level-ish, which is, kind of lower budget level for the world, and then something that NFB might support in some way.
Okay. What is a rough approximation of what an independent Canadian film would cost?
Independent Canadian films are like, let's say if it's coming from a veteran filmmaker, would be 5 to, like, let's say 5 million, something like that. Like that would be average. There are films that have been made in Canada that have cost more, like around 10, but that's very rare, because the funding just isn't there for it. Unless it's not public money, but more private money, and that's usually just kind of a Hollywood film anyway.
Right.
So if it's coming from Telefilm, which they're the main people who give money to films in Canada, Telefilm, or the different provincial organizations. So in Ontario, it's Ontario Creates. In Quebec, it is Sodec, and there's different organizations that give money as well. I'd say anywhere from 2 to 5. Let's say 2 to 5 million would be realistic.
Okay. How much money would we save if we agreed to do all of the curling stunts ourselves? So we wouldn't have to pay professional curlers for the stunts.
I don't know if I could give you a professional opinion on that. I'm sure you'd save something, but it might be negligible in the full budget.
All right. So Ryan, you have an idea that you don't think falls into this feasible category.
Yes, I do.
All right. Let's start with it then.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. All right. So here is my film pitch. And I was, asked to think about genre and asked to think about, things beyond the sports aspect as I was coming up with this. So here we go. The year is 2040, and the world has been invaded by aliens. This is a comedy. The aliens are clearly superior to us in all ways and could easily colonize us. However, they give us the same deal that they give to every planet that they colonize. They will randomly select one piece of our popular culture, and if we prove that the invaders are not better than us at it, we can go about our merry way. However, no planet has ever defeated the aliens at this. Remarkably, the winter sport of curling is selected. The aliens give humans 2 weeks to select their team of 2 men and 2 women to compete against them. Immediately, humans argue over who should be the ones to compete. The Canadians are all incredibly arrogant jerks who think that their 4 best players should be the ones to play the aliens. However, the one journalist allowed in the room for the discussion suggests finding America's former Olympic champion who set the curling world on fire as a 20-year-old in the 2020s before he flamed out dramatically and no one knows where to find him. However, this journalist is also his ex-girlfriend and knows exactly where he is. She is then dispatched to his cabin in the remote woods of Minnesota to find him and convince him to return to curling and save humanity. A training montage and moment where the curler and journalist reconnect, and he reveals the secret to reading curling ice that only he was ever able to figure out later. Our hero curler leads 3 other younger and diverse curlers into their battle on the ice against the aliens. Late in the game, our big curling hero recognizes changes in the ice that the aliens don't, and he is able to lead the big comeback victory that saves humanity. As everyone rushes onto the ice to lift him onto their shoulders and celebrate, the aliens reveal that they were lying the entire time and they're going to kill us anyway. Roll credit.
That's a nice twist ending. I like that.
That's my M. Night ending.
That's great. If you were to cast it, like if you had anyone to cast, who would be your hero?
Oh, I did not have time to think about this. So it's got to be someone
like relatively young, right?
Someone
Maybe
like
40s?
mid 40s, early 50s, or someone who's older who can play mid 40s to early 50s.
Right.
How about Paul Rudd?
Paul Rudd.
I love their Paul Rudd.
He's
Yeah.
great in everything. So
And ageless.
yes,
And
absolutely.
ageless.
He could be any age.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. So okay, so what does anyone else has anything to add to this one, or
Or is it perfect just the way it is?
perfect the way it is?
Is it Space Jam but for curling?
No, because the aliens aren't stealing anyone's abilities. They're just going to straight up beat us at our.
All right. Okay.
So what's the alien point of view here? Like what are they trying to do? Are they just trying to play with the humans? Is it like they're playing with their food sort of thing, or what's the?
They're going to take all of our resources.
They're going to take all our resources, and they want to just destroy the planet? Like they're going to kill all the humans? Is that their plan, or are they just going to colonize the planet with the humans around? And
we're going to be killed eventually, but not before we are used as labor to help harvest all of our resources for the aliens.
I love that.
But what is the point of the ending if everyone's just going to die? Like, doesn't that mean that the previous 2 hours of the curling competition has been utterly meaningless?
Yep.
So Sean brings up a good point, I think. Although I do like the twist ending and that the aliens are going to double cross. It's like narratively there's going to be a problem unless you have unless there's it really depends, because you said this is a comedy, right? So
Yes.
having a comedy end like that, I think, is perfectly fine, as long as the tone is kind of leads you to that point by the end.
We can keep it ridiculous.
My question was, what's so funny about this? What makes it a comedy?
Like I said, we just keep it ridiculous throughout the whole thing. Like basically just make fun of all the tropes as we go through this.
So when you have an antagonist who is sort of like overblown evil, it's a Dr. Evil style of level of evil, like the aliens are, right? So their motivations are purely made up. It doesn't come from anywhere real. But it's so ridiculous that they think they have delusions of grandeur. Is that kind of a fair way to put it?
They're basically like the big floating heads from Rick and Morty. I don't know if I'm the only one who's ever seen those episodes.
Yeah.
Are they like Kratos and like from The Simpsons, like those?
Yeah, Kang and Kodos. Yeah, the end.
Kodos.
The end is very much a "don't blame me, I voted for Kodos."
Okay,
All right.
that's great. And so, do they present themselves like that, or do they ever look human?
That's a good question.
How they playing curling, I guess, is the biggest thing.
I mean, basically, that's the part that I haven't yet decided on. Like, do we make them shapeshifters? I mean, really, that's going to depend. A lot of that is going to depend on the budget, right? Like, if we don't have the budget to make them look like some ridiculous being, then we're just going to have to say, oh, we're shapeshifters who are taking on a human form as we go through this process of colonizing.
It'll make them like alien robots. Make them Curly the robot.
Curly the robot has to be involved
Yeah.
in the film now.
A team of 4 Curly the robots.
Yeah.
Who is
I mean,
the,
that's
who would the
basically
funniest
what they.
curler be to have them shapeshift as? Like, so we cast curlers as shapeshifting aliens. Who are the funniest 4 curlers to pick as the shapeshifters?
The shape-shifting aliens.
Yeah, because Darren Molding immediately comes to mind for me.
See, my first thought was Rachel Holman, but
Yeah.
My first thought was Russ.
Russ Howard. That'd be like a pretty scary team. Darren Molding, Rachel Holman, and Russ Howard. That'd be good. I don't know. Who seems like they're kind of alien-like?
Maybe Brendan Botcher, very
Howard.
cyborgy.
Yeah.
Botcher, all the skips kind of seem a bit like, you're not sure.
They could wear contact lenses that change the shape of their eye
Yeah.
so that they look like aliens.
Or is it the aliens can take over the bodies of curlers?
No, because that's Space Jam.
Not the ability to take over their bodies.
Also, that's a classic sci-fi trope.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And then it is like celebrity curlers are possessed.
Right.
Yeah.
I think listen to the idea. I think generally speaking, your comedy will probably come a lot from the aliens. So you would need to inject personality into them of some kind. Like you would need to have to like their motivations would have to be ridiculous. I think that's where you were going anyway. So if they had ridiculous motivations all the time, and a lot of times when you see an alien in a human body, or even just an alien living in human society, they don't the fish out of water kind of thing, where they don't understand what our society is like. Well, what makes them pick? Is it them, the aliens, that pick curling, or is it the humans that get to pick whatever game they want?
No, the aliens randomly selected, and my thought on that was I remember SNL did this when they SNL did kind of a play on the whatever of the century back in 1999, and they came up to their tournament of people of the 20th century. Came up with like Gandhi versus Moses Malone. And they said that the computer randomly selected one aspect to compare the two, and the computer randomly selected basketball. Or no, it was Daryl Dawkins. It was Daryl Dawkins and Gandhi, and the computer randomly selected basketball. So Daryl Dawkins was the greatest human of the 20th century.
I like it.
It's good.
That's great. Okay, so I think it's safe to say that the budget level would be too high. I mean, you know what? It depends, because as you were,
I've seen a lot of cheap sci-fi.
Yeah,
man.
as you were describing it, I was like, you could do this for cheaper. I mean, especially if the aliens looked more human, with little alien aspects to them, you could believe it. And if it was done, when you described the reporter girlfriend going into the forest and finding this guy in a cabin, alone, I could almost imagine the beginning of the film where this happens, where this person's going looking for this person, and he's cut off from society and doesn't know anything that's going on. And she opens the door and he's like, "Oh, you're here." And she says, "You need to save us and play curling for the planet." Right away, that starts off in kind of I think a funny way. So
Smash cut to credits
that way.
Part of this is just I've seen so many poorly done sports movies and so much poorly done sci-fi, and watched so much MST3K that I kind of just hop smashed the two.
Bring them all.
I think it works, and I think there is a way you could make this for less money.
You can definitely make it for less money.
Yeah. It doesn't sound like special effects is a big. You're not going to see them destroy the planet, or maybe at the very end you see them, like a couple of shots of their invasion. But outside of that, I think you could do it. Okay. So what you have a title for this great film?
Well, Third Rock from the Sun is taken,
Is it?
but that's really the only thing I got.
You could call it the Third Rock from the Button.
I'm gonna write that down.
I come up with all the names for our podcast episodes, by the way.
Oh, do you? It's a talent. I'll tell you, finding a title is a really hard thing. I spend a lot of time trying to figure out a title for a script. So
Yeah.
Respect.
Yeah, we'll call it the Untitled Ryan McGee Project.
Okay.
All right. So, Jonathan, do you have an idea?
I mean, so mine, I'll just pick up on the one we did this last time. So mine's basically, it's shamelessly a ripoff of The Big Lebowski. Right?
Okay.
And so like the motivation for that is every time I watch The Big Lebowski, like the bowling team dynamics are exactly like the dynamics of every curling team I've ever played on.
Okay.
So basically the premise is, so instead of 3 people, you have 4. So like they're the kind of the protagonists. So there's the dude type player who's like the hippie type. There'll be a MAGA type who will be the skip, but like actually the dude's the best shooter. He's like the third. So he's like the best shooter on the team. He's the star player on the team, but he's too chill to skip. Obviously a pothead. The skip's kind of definitely like I'm not sure if it's set in Canada, you'd have to play around with it a bit, but the idea is he's like a MAGA type, like super rageaholic, kind of super bossy, over domineering. And it's their dynamic that's kind of part of the comedy. Then the second on the team is kind of like the chilled out player guy. So he's like a ladies' man, he's a motorbike instructor, Aikido dojo owner. So he's like the slick guy. And the lead works for either the IRS or Revenue Canada as like a gambling tax attorney. So super geeky guy. And this becomes relevant in a second. So the bad guys, so there's basically 2. So basically, there's a guy who is he's based off ads that played in Minneapolis in the early 2000s, who is like this middle-aged dude with his very young wife, always advertising jacuzzi. So she was always in a bikini and like the Minneapolis, it's called the Midwest Jacuzzi King.
Okay.
So it's basically shamelessly ripped off him. And
That's fine.
Him and his significantly younger lady is the bunny character, basically. And then there's the gang who I haven't really figured out who the gang is, like what their orientation is. But the basic setup is the gang, it's a case of mistaken identity also, because the dude guy looks like the Jacuzzi King, and he always gets teased about that. He's out, and a couple of toughs from the gang take his curling bag because they think it's the money to pay off to get back the Jacuzzi King's girlfriend. And so that's the setup for the movie. And so the dude character basically needs to spend the movie getting back his lucky curling shoes. And that's his primary motivation, because they're playing in the club championships. And so basically before the case of mistaken identity, you see that he's the star player. They win the round of 16, go on to the quarterfinals, right? So he's missing his curling shoes. Most of the drama happens up to the quarterfinals, where he's missing his curling shoes. They play terribly. And the big drama is their nemesis team is in the semifinals, right? And so the plot points aren't all super worked out, but basically the motivation is to try to get the curling shoes back, whereas the gang thinks he has the money, and the Jacuzzi King wants them to help him give the money to the other guy to get the handoff, right? So it's the kind of classic Lebowski plot. And so it gets resolved by a big standoff in the parking lot between the gang, the nemesis curling team, and them. And the whole point is that the IRS guy is trying to work on identifying Jacuzzi King for tax evasion for all his gambling debts. And so that brings in one angle. The Aikido guy is trying to protect them when there's a fight. So part of the premise of Aikido is it's you don't start the fight, so you're a bit chilled backwards, but you can kill anyone. So the Aikido guy is there to try to protect them when the gang and the rival curling team comes in. So he gets killed by the gang protecting them, but the dude gets his shoes back, so he's able to then win the semifinals, and that's the resolution. But they lose their
Without this second guy, isn't that guy? Is he missing?
Yeah, he's dead. No, he dies. They got to play 3-handed, but they end up winning.
Okay.
So he's the sacrifice for them to get the shoes back. So that's the real plot's about the curling, but it's film noir, So that's the kind of basic premise. So
That sounds great. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Big Lebowski, so anything that's connected to that is something that I will like.
Yeah.
Is there a way that the twist at the end is the Jacuzzi King's lady is who subs in as their fourth player?
Oh, that'd be good.
Oh.
So maybe can you expand? Okay, the Jacuzzi guy.
Yeah, Jacuzzi Kid.
So his wife. I didn't hear this. Is she kidnapped or something?
Yeah. So she's kidnapped. So the setup is the Jacuzzi King's wife or whatever. She's like 20 something and he's middle aged, right? So, and they're on TV. So she's been kidnapped because he's racked up a huge gambling debt. So that's his problem. Hence the lead is the guy who's investigating him for tax evasion due to his gambling debts.
Right.
So that's kind of how it also loops them in. And so the gang thinks that he's the guy there to hand off the bag with the money. And then in the handoff, it gets confused. So he actually ends up with the money at the exchange, the curling guy.
The curling guy.
They have his shoes.
Okay,
yeah. So there's the shoes. Okay. And the Jacuzzi guy's after him for the money, as is the gang. And all he really wants is his curling shoes back. And the gang obviously doesn't care about the curling shoes. So the curling shoes just kind of go on their own adventure as they try to track it back. While he's got this big bag of money. And so the Walter types always try to persuade him to play really hard. Like kind of, you got to be very aggressive. You got the money. Why don't you, use that to get your leverage? Whereas the Aikido guy is trying to tell him to, play it straight, right? So that's like kind of tension too. What do you do with this bag of, let's say, $1 million? But all you really want is your curling shoes.
And is there anyone on his team? I like that motivation, but is anyone on his team just want to keep the money? Like, do they ever? is there ever that part, right? Like, I mean, if you got a I don't know. Let me ask this question to you four, but it's like if you could trade your lucky curling shoes for a bag full of $1 million, what would be your response? What would you do?
So I think the Walter type wants to do that, but the problem is you've got two gangs you've got the Jacuzzi King guy and the gang going after them for the money, right?
Right.
So that's what stops them from pocketing it.
Right. Is there any point in the film, and maybe this is just straight taking stuff from Big Lebowski, but is there any point where the bag of money goes missing?
That'd be good. They're also chasing the money and the shoes.
Yeah, because what you have right now is you have a plot where you have a character. I mean, you have characters who have the thing that each other wants, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like the mechanics of them getting together and trading that, it shouldn't be that complicated. But if you separate the things, right? So it's like one of them doesn't have the shoes and one of them doesn't have the money for whatever reason, then that might add to the story.
Okay, yeah, so that's a good point. So in my mind, the bigger plot twist was the shoes going missing, which is absurd, right? Because no one's going to care about curling shoes. Yeah, but they kind of keep going on like more and more things because it's his lucky shoes. He really needs them. And the point is the second game, they suck. He sucks, right? So he's got to get his shoes back. But yeah, obviously the money could also go missing too. So they got to get the money to get the shoes back too. And part of it's that they're torn between the two people who are both fighting for the money, right? So the Jacuzzi King guy's like, just give me the money back and I'll give you your shoes. I'll even give you a cut. Whereas the other guy's like, give us the money or else we'll kill you or whatever, right? So
yeah, that sounds good. And then if you've got these shoes, I mean, you get a lot of comedy from him wanting the shoes, right? Because they're a ridiculous want. I think there's a lot of comedy there. That it's where he's obsessed with it. I don't know like where it goes. I mean, we could figure out another day, but it's like it going missing is interesting as well as the money. I think figuring out where both of those things end up.
Yeah.
Because it's sort of the hijinks of where they go in this kind of film where the money gets, somebody gets it, somebody takes some of the money out and all the things that can happen to that bag of $1 million compared to all the things that can happen to the shoes and where they end up going, especially, he could just throw those shoes away.
Yeah.
Right at the beginning, and they've got to, where does it?
Got to go find them. Yeah.
Got to go find them. The bag got thrown in a dumpster, and the dumpster went there, and then somebody found them, and so there's can be a lot there. So that's good.
So it's a good idea. I like it.
Yeah, I like it. That's a great idea, John.
All right, so I have.
Sorry, what are we calling this one?
Oh yeah, what's your title, John?
Oh, I don't know.
You got to think of a title.
You call it the Jacuzzi King, right?
Jacuzzi King, yeah. Midwest Jacuzzi King, yeah.
All right, so I'll give you mine. This is my real one. I won't. We can talk about my trilogy idea later, but here's my real idea for the prestige film, that curling film that I think could potentially work. Maybe we'll see. So we open in small town Canada. We don't identify where. That I think is going to be important. We don't identify specifically where we are in the country. And we see a family of Syrian refugees arriving at their new home. And the family is a mother, a father, and 3 teenage daughters who arrive in this small town. And we see them getting set up and trying to get used to the weather because it's the middle of the winter. And then we cut to the local curling club, which is a 2-sheet curling club, and they're having their annual meeting. And it's pointed out that one of the women's teams has to withdraw from the league in the middle of the season, and they need a team so that they can continue with the season. Otherwise, the women's league would have to shut down. And somebody says, well, here are the new family just arrived, and there's 4 women in the family. Maybe that could be the new team. And we see a lot of resistance in the meeting from pretty much everybody in the club to say, like, no, we don't want them as part of the club. But then somebody gets up and says, well, do you want to play or not? And then you have that like fun silent moment where nobody has anything to say. And then so we cut to somebody going, asking the women if they want to play. And they sort of have to get talked into it, with the motivation for them being that this could be an opportunity for them to integrate themselves and get to know people into the community, but also to help them learn the language. And this can be in either French Canada or English Canada. Doesn't matter to me. So we see them go and start to play, and they're not doing particularly well. But the mother was a soccer player, and her strategy that she's going to pull from her experience as a soccer player is to just put all the rocks on the button. That's all they're going to do. They're not going to try any other shots, just all the rocks on the button, with her motivation being, in soccer, you just shoot on the goal. Like, that's what you do. That's what you're trying to do. So we're just going to put all of our rocks on the button. And they start to win. And this gets them a lot of hate from the other people in the club. And there's a lot of pushback from the other people who feels that they're not playing the right way. They're, not being properly respectful of the sport, and how dare they come in and win these games. And then we see a moment where the father is watching and he's really proud, and he overhears some other people at the club talking bad about this family and, what are they doing? And then we get to the end of the year, and through a montage, of course. And then we are at the end of the season, and it is the final of the league. And the team has made it into the final, and it comes down to the last rock, and it's the mother who is the skip who's throwing it, and she has a draw right on the button to win. And you just see the shock and the rest of the members of the club. And that victory, though, puts them into the larger regional competition. And so we go from the club to the regional competition, where in this regional competition, they actually get support from the people who are there. So they come from this club where they've been pushed back against the whole time, of people who don't think that they should be there, to this larger area, this larger competition where they get a lot of support. There's actually crowds, and the crowds get behind them. And through the week of this competition, their confidence grows and grows and grows, and they feel like, oh, this is part of, our family now. This is our sport. And we see them in the final. They make a great shot on their last one, but the other team makes a better shot and they lose. But they get cheered off the ice, and they feel as though, this whole thing was worth it and everything was great now, and we see them all embrace at the end. So that is the idea. It's sort of the story of how the family uses the sport to not only become acclimatized to Canada, but they adapt the sport to themselves. And so we see this melding of their culture, their approach to things, and a traditional Canadian sport. That's the idea.
Great.
So Sean, this is Cool Runnings, right?
But it's not funny. This is prestige.
Oh, okay.
Prestige. It's serious.
I was gonna say it's Hoosiers.
Hoosiers. Yeah, it's classic sports.
All stories are the same. So,
So you guys would be able to explain this to me, me being a non-curling person. Is it realistic that a group of people that didn't know the sport at all could rise, even at a local level, and then rise to this what you're describing?
I would say
Unlikely, but I think that there'd have to be a strong emphasis on the strategy side.
Yeah.
What they're doing strategically is so innovative and so much better than what the rest of the teams are doing, that even if they're not as skilled because they're new to the sport,
Right.
what they've figured out strategically puts them at such an advantage.
Do you know what this is, Ryan?
Ball.
Yeah, this actually happened out of the Oklahoma Curling Club. This is exactly like Jesse's girls. Remember this?
Oh yeah.
At the first arena net. So we had so basically, have I told you about the Wild Amigo, the strategy we invented for arena curling?
No.
So it's basically, when I started playing arena ice, it's so terrible you can't play normal strategy. So we basically would just throw draws like all the time because that's all you can play. Because you can't play an open hit because you can miss by like a lot. So my joke was I'd call 7 draws and I'd try something ridiculous on my last. So we called it 7 draws and a run back, and you'd either score 5 or give up 5, right? So we were playing in the U.S. Arena Nationals the first year. The women's team was not that experienced at all, and Ron Conlon, who played with us, just told them just draw everything, like all the time. And it actually people got really upset at it, right? Like actually, there was one game they're in the semifinals and they're up 3 and they're calling draw, and they ended up stealing because they got one locked in. It was all junk. But the umpire was so upset. He's like, "You can't do that." And they ended up winning the bronze that year. So it actually does work as like for a novice team, right?
So you can say it's
bronze,
based on a true story.
They won consolation.
Consolation of it, but they won something. But by all rights, they shouldn't have won because they were like first year curlers playing. Even Arena Nats has like good teams playing in it, right? So it's like first year curlers like won by just playing this very unorthodox strategy, right? And Ron would go over between each game and say draw. What? Sorry, Ryan?
There were people in the warm room like yelling at them, and obviously you can't hear in the warm room, but like just yelling at glass, "What are you doing?" And then you have Jonathan and I sitting next to them just cackling.
So this works. So this is an actual thing that it's not just an invention that people would get it. Not only would it work, but that people could get upset about it too.
I think people would. I personally think that's a really good strategy for a club player to play. Personally, but
because on arena ice,
would they be more upset? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
On arena ice, when you call just all draws, like guards will just magically happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right, Faisal. To answer your question, yeah, people get very. I mean, you see this in all sports, right? Whenever someone comes along with like an extreme, innovative strategy, people get upset about it, right?
Yeah.
They're like, "Oh, it's ruining the game" or whatever, right?
It's Moneyball, right? Moneyball.
Moneyball.
Yeah, but what I think would be interesting about this as a storytelling technique, as Ryan has to leave us, is the idea of not belonging. And the new strategy representing to the community that the family lives in, that it further others them within the larger story. So, curling is really important to the community, and here are these people who are not respecting that, and it just further sets them aside as they are new to the community.
Right.
It'd have to be out west. It'd have to be Saskatchewan or like one of the hitting provinces.
We don't say where it is, so as to not make anybody across the country mad.
Right.
Well, that's
I kind of like
strategy. I would say the specificity helps sometimes. Like if you know, I mean, for any kind of story, especially if that's something that you know about, I don't know if that's where you're from or something, but if there's a community that you know a lot about, because you've been part of that community or for whatever reason, if you tell a story from that community's point of view, I think that can usually help you. Like, it usually helps, especially in a pitch. You could say, I know what this is like. You know, Jonathan says, oh, this happened to me. Like,
Yeah.
I was, this same kind of situation happened. That usually
Yeah.
helps.
Yeah.
I'll say about the idea itself, which I mean, I like the idea in general, it's compelling. I think maybe we should work on what the antagonists are. So you're talking about a community, they need people, and so let's bring these people in. It sounds, I mean, at the beginning, it sounds a little, is it just pure racism that they don't want that the people don't want to bring them into the bring this team in?
Yeah, so it's like it sort of that refrain that you hear from certain quarters when people are talking about refugees, that they're
Right. scared
of violence or that they're not Christian, or like all those things that are lobbied against refugees like super unfairly. That is what comes out at this meeting.
Okay, so I think that can be good. I feel like the best, I think that for me, I'll say, from my perspective, the scariest racist is the racist that doesn't present as a racist. So it's like, if you have that kind of situation where somebody is against them joining but isn't outright about the reasoning, I think that can be, there's that can bring more, especially if it's from the Syrian family's perspective. Like, they don't understand why this is happening, why are they asking them to join, but then there's this, they're probably feeling something while they're in there. I think also the progression, you probably need someone to be won over.
Mm-hmm.
So you have because you have this story and it's from the family's perspective, but they're sort of just beating everything. Even at the end, even though they lose, they're still beating something, right? And I feel like that's not quite enough for your story, that they need to prove their worth to someone else, right? So, it sounds like they win this competition in their regional, or not the regional, sorry, the small town that they're in, and people are still mad at them. But if there are people who then kind of join their cause, kind of get won over, I think that you have a story where you have a coming together story, which generally, it sounds like that's what you're making, right? It's like you're making a film in which people are separated. There's misunderstanding and miscommunication between the two groups, and it could go both ways as well, right? I mean, there can be anger between the family and other people for whatever reasons you can create as the narrative's going on, and then they can be some can be won over, and you have others that you always have that villain that's never won over, that doesn't then because you need that shot of the villain being angry after they win,
What if you had the sort of old-timey coach that, sees them playing this strategy at the club a couple times and thinks, I can really do something with this team. I don't want to take agency away from the oppressed group, but having somebody that can come in and implement these unorthodox strategies and sort of, maybe instead of having them play in the league, put them in the Bonspiel, right? Have somebody be the one that recognizes the talent and furthers their quest, I guess.
Yeah, it's a bit like when you said draw everything, it made me think of Karate Kid and Mr. Miyagi, giving giving some insight, right? So maybe if you had somebody older in the club who maybe he did the draw style, but it's been shaken away as everyone wants to play a run back now, right? So somebody in the club's basically the Robin Silvernagle type, I'm going to run back everything kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's she's not necessarily the bad person, but it's she's seen as the star in the club, and this new team's playing a different style and also taking away a bit of that thunder. Maybe that's part of what's going on.
Maybe somebody who's like the past president, who everyone's like, oh, that guy's, he's done. He's got kooky ideas. He just sits in his house, mothballs all around.
Yeah. So maybe
the idea of whatever strategy is coming from the team.
I think the team should be the one that implements the strategy, but then the sort of...
He sees it and starts helping them, right? He's like, oh, I see what you're doing, and here's why it works. Everyone else is mocking them, but he's actually like, no, keep doing it. Here's why I'll help you a bit more, right? So maybe it's something like that where it's...
And that person is the one that, furthers them along, because without them, they wouldn't enter, a larger event.
Okay, what about this? So if part of the thing is trying to maybe the hidden racism, the deal in the league is whoever wins the league, this person will pay for it. And as they're having the meeting, someone says, well, what happens if they win? Will you still pay for them? And the person just goes, they're never going to win. It's not an issue. Like, we don't have to worry about them. And then they win. We see this person have to then comes around to the idea of maintaining that sponsorship. And then that's the person who ultimately supports them and then shows up at the bigger event and hears some of the comments of the crowd, of like, who do these people think they are? And then there's a light bulb moment for that person about how they weren't welcoming to this family by seeing it happen elsewhere. And they come to be the main cheerleader for the team.
Yeah.
Yeah, that also sounds good. So it's two things, right? You're talking about a coach or this. I don't think both of those people would be in it, or is it only one or the other?
I think one or the other.
Okay.
So it's like the owner that wants to sell the team, but gets won over by his scrappy group of underdogs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Who initially he didn't like.
Dismisses them.
Yeah.
Doesn't think they're...
Seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now they're being taken seriously.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Great.
All right. So do you want to hear my trilogy idea?
Trilogy.
Okay. Yes, I do.
Also, I think that could fit in that idea if you wanted to make it into other ones. So the first year they go to this regional thing, the next year they go to the provincials, and then the national championship, and then eventually the Olympics or something. If
right,
you could pick that the next step.
Sounds like a series. You're describing a series.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So Sean, what's the name? What's the name of this? The title of this movie?
Making a House a Home.
Oh, I like that.
Okay.
We follow their sort of overall story of coming to the country and finding a home in the community. All right. So my trilogy idea, this is a Hallmark movie trilogy. Well, it's not really a trilogy. It's 3 movies in one night that would run back to back. And because the Hallmark Channel runs Christmas movies 360 days a year, they're Christmas movies, of course. So the night would be advertised as Curl Up to Christmas. And in the first movie, we have a mixed doubles team, and we see them go and they win an Olympic medal. That's how it starts. But as they're embracing, we have a close-up on the woman's face, and she's not fully happy in this moment. And cuts to 7 months later, whatever it is, and she goes home for Christmas, and she goes to the curling club. And Scott, you seem excited about this.
I think she's pregnant.
No, she's not. She goes. She plays in a charity event at the club where she grew up, and she gets paired with her high school boyfriend, who is now a widower, and we see them and they reconnect and they have a great time and they go for a drink and everything's amazing. And then because there's a storm coming in, she decides to go home a day early, and she goes home, and she's married to her mixed doubles partner, goes home, and oh no, he's having an affair. So she's really upset and crushed, and like her life, she wasn't super happy anyway, and now this. So she goes back home for Christmas, and her high school boyfriend, they just reconnected, shows up to her parents' house on Christmas Eve with roses. They go out to the gazebo in back, and they embrace and they get together. And the title of that one is House is Where the Heart Is.
Okay.
So that's the first one. And then you go to the second one, which is a film that follows the basic plot of the Pina Colada song. So we have a married couple who are at a curling bonspiel, but they're not fully satisfied with their relationship. And they both go onto a dating app to find another partner while they're at the curling bonspiel. And and we see flashbacks to why they're not happy. We see them talking with their team of, oh, should I actually do this? Should I not do this? And they eventually go on the app. They find an anonymous person to meet, and they meet, and it's them, and they fully embrace, and everything's great. And then they go out and they win the bonspiel together. And that's how that ends. And that one is called Love on the Rocks.
I want you to start from the beginning for that one. Just repeat, like, give me pitch it again, just if you can.
Okay, so we open on a couple that's packing to go to a bonspiel.
Okay.
So they're in their house, but they're kind of bickering and arguing with each other as they're packing. And so we see that they're not fully satisfied and invested in the relationship anymore. And then we see them travel to the bonspiel, and it's not a pleasant experience. They get to the bonspiel, and they start to play, and it's not going well. They're really frustrated with each other, and so they decide to not sit together afterwards in the lounge while they have a drink. And as they're sitting with other people, they each have a really good time. They're having fun again. Everything's great. And we see flashbacks where one of them says, back in the day, this is what curling was all about. And so we go back to their origin story of how they met at a curling club, at a bonspiel like this. And then we see the other one say, when things were really good, this is what we lived for. This is this is always what we wanted. And then we flash to, they just got married and they're winning bonspiels and they're having a great time. And so they both realize in the moment, like, how unhappy they are. And then they both have teammates say, hey, why don't you look at this? And it's like a curling dating app, basically, that you can meet up with other curlers. And we see them hum and haw about, like, should I do this? Should I not do this? And then they go out, say, the next morning, play the game, and get completely crushed because they're not focused. And we see them bickering. And that's the last straw for both of them. So they both, after the game, sign into the app and put in what they want in a partner and what they're interested in. And they unknowingly match with each other. And then they're like, all right, we'll meet for lunch somewhere. And then they both go and they arrive at the restaurant. They realize that they've matched with each other. They're like, oh my God. And then they have this great lunch where they reconnect, talk about everything that's gone wrong, why it's gone wrong, the communication we need. And they just, fall in love again over this. And then they go back to the club together, rejuvenated, excited. And they go in and they just run through the rest of the teams because now they're invested again. And they win the bonspiel.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry, I lost a bit of that at the beginning, so it might have been just my mind was floating away. So now I got it. Thank you.
So that one's called Love on the Rocks.
Sean, that sounds to me like it could be a really good short.
All right, my note's this. All right, have you seen Adam's Rib? It's like classic 1940s romantic comedy. It's like Spencer Tracy, Katharine Hepburn. And so the premise is they're lawyers, and they're lawyers. They're married together at the beginning. They get pulled apart, and then they kind of both consider other partners and then come back together again. So same plot as yours.
Right.
The triggering point, though, is because they're both lawyers, they take opposite sides in a divorce case. And so I would throw in the twist that somehow initially it starts as a bit of tension. They then decide to sign up with other partners in the mixed doubles competition. And then that's the thing that triggers them to go on the dating app.
Okay.
What
And then
about
the dating app's what brings them back together again.
So the inciting incident, they have a big argument over what strategy to do on
Yeah.
the last end of their game together. They
Yeah.
vehemently disagree, split ways for
Yeah.
Bonspiel.
Yeah.
Then
And it's
the rest.
And it's kind of the guy's a bit arrogant. He's a bit like, well, you should just listen to me because I'm whatever. And she's like, I don't need you, so I'll go off on my own. He's like, well, fine, I'll get whoever. But it's not that they become romantically involved with their partners. That then triggers the dating app.
Right.
That then triggers the. That makes sense or not?
But then how do you get? I like the idea of them reuniting and then like going on this run.
Yeah, but they could be multiple tournaments, right? It'd be like,
Yeah, flash forward 2 years and they're winning a gold medal.
yeah, but to me, what would make it interesting is that part of the trigger, he's a bit arrogant and dismissive of her as a partner.
Right.
They break up. She gets a partner. She beats him in the tournament, and that for him's like his pride can't take it. He then goes off the dating app, and then so does she, and then they come back together. Then they kind of reunite and win something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Jonathan's bringing up a really good point in that, you know, the characters, like what their personalities really make a big difference. And this, especially this kind of story, you're talking about like a pair and what their chemistry is and how it breaks down. And I think it's a good idea to have them broken. And also, I think, Scott, maybe you said that it sounds like a short. And I think, I mean, so far, the two ideas that you have brought up in this trilogy, they both, although this one is a bit longer, they both sound like short films as opposed to a feature, just because there isn't a, and that might be just because we're, you know, playing around here, but like usually a feature film will have a lot more story, you know, like there'll be a lot going on, but that doesn't mean to say that you can't, like this basic story can't be a feature film. It would just be fleshed out a little bit.
Yeah, you just got to flesh it out, yeah.
All right, and then the last one that I have in this sort of three-part is this is a coming-of-age story. So we open with a kid being dropped off at college by his parents, and they leave. And as soon as they leave, he starts to unpack, and we see he has like a rainbow T-shirt or a rainbow logo on something, maybe a binder or something. So that's sort of the indication that he's gay. And then we see that he goes to the curling club, and he meets a sophomore or a junior there who's like the head of the curling club at the school, and they start to talking, and the older one says, I also play in this rainbow league, this rainbow curling league. And but the younger, the freshman hasn't come out yet, especially to his parents, who are conservative and don't really approve of that. And so we see through the course of the semester, the two of them become really good friends. And the freshman is really struggling with his sexuality, and he wants to come out, but he doesn't know how to. And the older one is trying to encourage him to be open and to be honest, and it's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. They have then they have a little romantic moment, but the younger one's like, no, I can't do this. It's wrong. And they have a big blow up about it right before Christmas break at the last curling night of the semester. And then we see the younger one. He's back at home over Christmas, and his parents, this news story comes on about same-sex marriage, and he sees and his parents are like, oh, that's so wrong. Like, how can people do this? This is terrible. And we've seen this building tension in him throughout the whole story so far. And he just blurts out, well, that's me. And like, I'm gay. And his parents are stunned and they don't know what to say. And he's like, well, if you can't take it, then like, I don't want to be here. And he leaves and he goes to the other guy's house on Christmas Eve, knocks on the door. He sees him and he just runs in and he kisses him, and that's that. and they're kissing in the snow, and that's the end of the movie.
Very Hallmark.
I like it.
Yes. I also
Oh,
like it is short. So again, the storyline. Okay, here's a question for you. Do you think that this film is this film a love story, or is it a coming out story?
I think it's probably more of a coming out story.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if that's the case, I kind of want to know and see more, more scenes and more story between the main character and his parents, right? Because because right now it sounds like he's mostly at university, which is, as we all know, it's usually a place where you can be you for the first time in your life, right? It's like usually high school, you're young and you're trying to figure things out, and college is a place where many people figure out who they are and then become the person that they will be or probably will be for the rest of their lives. So, but there's not as much conflict there, right? It's like if the parents are nearby, or if there's some kind of I'm not feeling that quite yet, even though it's a very compelling story. Like the idea is compelling. It's just what kind of obstacles along the way is this character going through? Because right when you described it, I thought, okay, this is really great story. It almost felt as though the running out of his parents' house was the end of the first act kind of idea, right? It's like, he makes a decision, but that decision will reverberate, right, in his life. Like when you make that kind of decision, it's a big thing. So what will be the reverberations almost is an interesting thing. Maybe it's a starting off point for you.
Is the struggle the man versus self struggle, or is it man versus man, like the guy versus his parents? Or is it more of an internal thing that builds throughout that first act?
Well, yeah, I sort of would see it as like the internal struggle first.
So the sort of like, oh, I should be doing this to fit in, but it doesn't really feel like me.
Yeah, and then we see him get comfortable with himself through the friendship with the other person. And then it's sort of, he can't take sort of his parents anymore because he's now okay with himself for the first time in his life.
Okay.
And so he has to express that. Maybe the next step after that is he plays in the Rainbow League and he becomes really successful. And as his parents see that, maybe they show up eventually to a game, right? And we see them patching the relationship or trying to, and then they show up and support him as he plays in this league in a big game or something.
That totally.
I like it.
That's great. There's a trilogy, your Hallmark trilogy.
Yeah, that one's called.
Wait,
That one's called No More Guards.
Ooh, I like it.
Yeah. So that's so those are just sort of like, they're crumbs of ideas.
Okay.
So fully fleshed out ideas.
Very great. Oh, what was the one? House is Where the Heart is the first one, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right. Maybe it should be The House is Where the Heart is.
Yeah, The House.
The House.
Yeah. So those are just sort of three crumbs of idea. I do think though that I think like you said at the start, Faisal, that the relationships have to be front and center as opposed to necessarily the curling. That the curling is the conduit through which the relationships progress, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so with all of these ideas, and they're all interesting, and I can see films being made of all of them. Honestly, but it is really who those characters are is what really makes the story interesting. If we go back to the first one, who is it about? It's about this. You can start talking about the idea about the aliens coming down, and then they create this tournament, or they say we're going to pick a game, and then they create this tournament, and then the humans have to pick who's going to represent the species. But who's the story really about? It's about this kind of crotchety guy, ex curler, who has cut himself off from society, who gets a visit from his ex-girlfriend who tells him that he needs to curl the game of his life to save the human race.
Mhm.
Right? It's like that's the story.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so
Yeah.
figuring out who that guy is and like why he doesn't want to curl anymore. Maybe why is he living in a cabin away from people? Like, 'cause he hates people, I guess. Like, or, I mean, there's lots of reasons to be in a forest by yourself, but let's say one of them could be that he just doesn't like people anymore. So does he actually care that that these aliens have come and are going to destroy the society? And all, like, there's lots of kind of ways that you can build on these ideas. And then, Jonathan's idea with the Jacuzzi King, who are the, like, I mean, you're basing it on a film that's a touchstone for many people. So like there's that, right? So you've got that, you understand who the dude is, like, immediately. And is he, like, is it a direct mirror of that film? Or is he, like, is there a dude version that would be different for curling? Like, I don't know what that, if you can think of something that would be prototypical maybe from that world as opposed to the world. I don't know if that maybe it's exactly the same as you say.
Well, it kind of depends on where it's set. So when I was dreaming it up, I kind of set it in St. Paul just because for a whole bunch of reasons, right? So
again,
then
something
yeah, something I know, right? Like if you're doing it in Canada, I think it would have to be, like, I don't think it would work in Toronto. It'd have to be like mid-sized city, I think. Right? Like maybe Calgary or something. It can't be like Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. It's got to be kind of a bit
like Thunder Bay, I think would be
Thunder Bay, right? So because part of the joke with the Midwest Jacuzzi King is he thinks he's this massive big shot.
Right.
He's like a Donald Trump type, right? But he's like Midwest and selling jacuzzis, right? So he's not all that big, right? So part of the joke's this big fish, small pond kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the dude too he's got to be a slacker of that area, but not. I don't think it should be beat for beat. The dude from the Big Lebowski, but the dynamic that's interesting to me is you've got this kind of really conservative, reactionary, overbearing type, and then this kind of laid back type B slacker type is kind of like the back end of the team, right? As the bullying thing, and it's probably propelling the bullying thing, but then it's also propelling how they respond to this like absurd plot with the money and the
right.
Because part of what makes the Big Lebowski work is the dude's just like kind of bumbling through with like, like, hey, I'll just go see the businessman and ask for one of his rugs back, right? So he's gonna kind of play it like that, whereas the Walter type's got to be like, you be really aggressive. Whereas in my mind, the IRS type would be the law-abiding one, like, oh, we should call the police, we should whatever, right? So he's torn between like the devil and the angel kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and he's just because he's a slacker. He's kind of amoral, right? He's just like unable to make a decision. So he's more like a victim of circumstance than like leading the situation. So that's kind of what I see. That's kind of the motivation, right?
Right, and I think for that idea, that interaction, just what you were describing between all of the different characters and how they kind of oppose each other in a way. Maybe they're friends, but maybe they have arguments, right? I mean, that would bring the drama and the humor.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's what's kind of the key to making it good. Is you want to make that film good? Okay, well, these characters need to be at each other's throats, or they need to be have a really good chemistry, or whatever, right? Something.
Yeah.
So that's great. So that you can see that's also the characters, and then with the trilogy, I mean, all of them, especially because we are describing them as being a bit shorter. And don't take that as a criticism at all. It's a short is sometimes harder to make than a feature film. So having like a compelling story told in a 15 to 30 minute piece can be really, really hard. And still the same thing. You can take that 30-minute piece and expand it and flesh it out, and it could be easily a feature. Depending on the idea. Like sometimes it's just a short's just a crumb of an idea, and it's good that it is. But all of these ideas I could see expanded. So Your House is Where the Heart Is, with this woman getting cheated on, and then she gets together with her her ex-boyfriend from high school. I think so. Have you watched any of these Hallmark Christmas movies? Have you seen any of them?
I've seen one, and I've been told that if you've seen one, you've seen them all.
That is a very true comment. I think they are very, very similar. I've seen a few. Yeah, I have a bit of a tradition with some of my friends to sit around and watch at least one of them, and make fun of them as they're going on, because they are pretty hysterical. And sometimes, they can be just mindless entertainment. So I think with that one, I totally see it, but it's you have her, like, the inciting part is you have her winning this medal, and then she gets cheated on, and then she goes back to her hometown, right? Like, she goes back to her hometown, she meets the boyfriend.
No, she wins, but we see that she's not fully, like, excited about the win.
Right.
Her partner, who she's playing with, she doesn't really like him, and they're married. So, like, it's not as winning that wasn't as fulfilling as she wanted it to be.
Right.
When she goes home for this charity thing, and her ex-boyfriend used to be her partner, and she stopped playing with him so that she would have the chance to win the gold medal.
Oh, I see. He's a curler as well. The ex-boyfriend is also a curler. Okay, I didn't get that originally. So I think, like, I like this idea, but I feel like, again, to expand it, it sounds like this, that, she wins, she finds out that this guy's cheating, and she kind of leaves, and for other reasons too, because she's not really satisfied with him. I mean, I would probably, like, just hearing it like that, I feel like maybe she shouldn't win at the beginning, or like there's some other thing going wrong. Maybe a little mirroring your other idea with the couple. I mean, I could see these two ideas melding in certain ways. The couple that doesn't get along, and they're playing and they're not good together. Maybe they were good at one point. He's cheating and she's, very sad. These movies, the Hallmark movies, is what I'm thinking. Usually it's this woman, not usually, 100% of the time, it is a romantic comedy about a woman who is a city person, like is into the big life, who goes to her small town and falls in love with the local guy who understands the small town values and decides to stay there, right? I mean, that's the one every single time. And there's the fiance or the ex-husband or something from the big city who's trying to come back. And so what maybe your story needs as well is, like, I don't really understand what the ex-boyfriend, is he trying, or not the ex-boyfriend, sorry, the husband or the current partner, if he's trying to win her over, because there needs to be a push and pull, right? It's like there's no drama unless there's a push and pull. And especially if there isn't even the guise of there being a decision that she needs to make. I mean, we all know who she's going to pick in the end, but it's the journey that's going to give us something. So having the boyfriend who cheated on her come back, and he's trying to win her over, and maybe has some compelling arguments.
Yeah.
That probably will help your story a little bit. And explaining what those compelling arguments might be, like what's going on, what's drawing her, what's keeping her in the small town. There's obviously, like, if it's where she grew up, there's family and, friends and such there as well. So what's good about that, but also what has bothered her about that? Like, why did she leave? What made her to leave that small town? Has it changed? Has her perspective, and of course it is, has his perspective changed as she's been gone away? Are the things that she used to think were hokey now she thinks are charming, and how does that progress? Anyways, those are some thoughts for you to build on that one. And then the last one, kid being dropped off. I think we've talked a lot about that, but I think who the kid is and who the parents are, and also who the love interest is, I think that those are all, like, very interesting things to kind of build on. Like, what makes, you described it, but it's in big terms, right? It's like the MAGA family who are, do not want their son, is it their only son, to be, they can't believe that he could be gay, and they're pushing him towards one life that he doesn't want to live. and then but it's in a way it's the opposite, right? And often
Yeah.
I feel like these stories, the coming out stories, they often are the opposite stories. They are a kid from a small place that is opening their eyes to a bigger world, and as a such they are learning more about themselves, and in this case they're coming out and living that life. So it's a small kid going to a big city as opposed to the big city girl going back to her hometown, right? So it is a cross. They're crossing paths there.
Yeah.
So that's great. I mean, so like I said, I love these ideas. They're all like, it all depends on your characters and building on them.
Mhm.
So if you had to pick one of the ideas
Mhm.
for me to write up and submit to the National Film Board, which one do you think would get me in the least amount of trouble?
Well, I got to say, I mean, there's no trouble in creating an idea, even if it's big and unrealistic, or if it's not something that somebody wants to make. As long as it's a compelling idea, I think it is worthy of making, at least that first step. So, okay, let me think. So, okay, well, first I'm gonna first say, generally speaking, the NFB, and I mentioned this to Jonathan in an earlier conversation, but the NFB generally, they don't make feature films, like feature drama films anymore. They used to.
Right.
They, like back in the 70s and the 60s, certainly, they had their hands in that kind of, in that genre. But very much now, like in today's world, they generally don't. They might give a little bit of support here and there, depending on who the filmmaker is, and like they have a few programs to give some small support to feature drama. But generally, they, like, what they do, their mainstay, and it has been since their creation, is documentary, right? So that's the main thing they do. But they also put money into short films, whether they be dramatic or fiction. Dramatic or a documentary, or animation. And animation is a big thing that they do as well. And none of you had any animation ideas. Very disappointed about that, I gotta say. But although I could imagine, maybe that first one that Ryan had could
I
be,
think so.
could be an animation. So
I thought of it as basically Space Jam. So, like, if the aliens were cartoons,
right.
the humans were still live action, would that work?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I could imagine something like that. And in fact, in a way, as a short, that's a pretty great idea. Like just the basic concept of it sounds funny. I think it's very easy to convey that it's funny. Just the ludicrousness of the idea itself. Like if you say, as Jonathan says, if it's a bit of a back and forth between animation and real life, I think that would be cool. So that's
and if you
good.
could get like celebrity curlers to play the team, that was kind of why I was like going with Space Jam. It's like Space Jam's like Michael Jordan, like all the good basketball players in the '90s, right?
Right, exactly. So that's good. So okay, now let's take NFB out of the equation just for the time being. So you mentioned the beginning when we were talking, you were saying, just a film that's kind of realistic to be made. I could, let's see. It's always hard picking something on the fly without thinking about it too much. But
Right.
But like I could see, okay, so like that first one. I mean, like I said, I like all these ideas. I can see them all fitting into this budget. Now, the one with the family, like the Syrian family coming in, I can see that being made as an idea. I think that it would require collaboration with that community, though.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the sole like producer writer of it could not be Sean Graham. That 100% would not work.
Yeah. So like I like that idea. It certainly it could have legs. It's and it's something. It's a subject of immigration, which is something close to my heart anyway. So I really like the idea of that. But yeah, there'd have to be some kind of a, if you were to ever pitch that, you would have to be, oh, I'm working with this person that's, that is either from that community or understands the community really well. Because obviously you understand curling, so you can come from that world, and you can come from the world of maybe the town that they're coming in. But someone would have to be connected, especially in Canada. Thankfully, that is being pushed a lot more than it has been in the past. In the past, anybody could make any film, and although I believe anybody can write anything, I think especially for a story like this, you need community involvement. So that's really good. And then Jonathan's Jacuzzi King idea, I really love, because it's like the Big Lebowski. I think it needs to be expanded a little bit more in terms of like how those characters are interacting, and how because it can't just be the problem with it. It's like one of the strengths is that it is the Big Lebowski, and that is a touchstone, but it's also a detriment, because you need to be like, how is it different from the Big Lebowski, and that needs to be quite clear. Like, what is the I can't remember in the Big Lebowski, what town are they in? Like, what
They're
city?
in LA. They're in LA. So there's things that I like about it, like love about the Big Lebowski. Like the two things I really love about the Big Lebowski, it's actually one of the lines, right? Is the voiceover guy is like, when it pans in, it's like there's always a man of a time, right? It's very explicitly Los Angeles, 1991, right? And it's like they're playing off the Gulf War, and it's like part of it's that that works for me is that it's like, here's this guy who used to be in the Students for Democratic Society, super left wing, and he's kind of become aimless. And basically, Walter, like every time I watch it, I become more convinced Walter's basically like proto Tea Party, proto MAGA, right? It's you can kind of it's a boomer flick, and it's like super clear which way this generation's going, right? And like part of like in some ways, they actually just read the cultural politics of the boomer generation really well. They start off as these hippies, and it's kind of in descent by 91, and it becomes this like reactionary thing. So yeah, I think part of like, I don't want to just recreate the Big Lebowski, but part of what I like from that is that it's set in a place and a time in the recent past, and the characters are kind of touching cultural touchstones too. So that's kind of like, I think it would depend. If it's for an NFB one, you couldn't set it in St. Paul in, say, the 2010s or something. But
no, but you could have maybe a millennial who hasn't been able to move out of their parents' house. As that kind of slacker of modern days. It's like I think it's like you steal the trope, but I think by moving the place and the time, I think that affects it a bit. And then I don't think the plot. Well, first of all, the Big Lebowski's plots, I've watched it so many times, I still don't think I understand it. So
It's quite complex.
So I think I agree. It could. I don't think it could just be like Big Lebowski on ice, but in a certain sense, they're kind of stealing from this like classic film noir get-ups too, right? Where it's like there's something you've got to get, and the bowling's kind of incidental. So I kind of like that that part of it too.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, you would never describe. I don't think you would describe the Big Lebowski as a bowling film. Like a film. I don't think. It's not a film about bowling. I mean, it's a film. It has bowling as a big part of it, but it's not a bowling film.
Exactly. It's not, but it's kind of like the inspiration for me is actually every time I watch it, I'm like, it is a bowling. Like someone involved in the writing had to have been on a bowling team or been involved enough in bowling to kind of capture the like all of it, just like all the the bad teams in the leagues, the league politics. Like the funniest thing of the whole "I don't roll on Shabazz" part, right? Where it's like people playing shenanigans in club leagues. It's just like that's like right out of curling club culture too, right? I'm sure have you ever had a dodgy ruling by the match committee chairman in your life? So I think there's a lot of like stuff that can be borrowed from that too to drive the plot, but it can't just be like a recreating note for note the Big Lebowski plot. I agree with that for sure.
So one thing I've learned today is that characters are really what matters when it comes to films. You can have a storyline, But if you don't have good characters to go along with that, you're not going to have a good film. Is that kind of
That's
right?
100% true. It's it's funny because you have to think of both. Obviously, a good film has both a good storyline, good structure, and has interesting, compelling characters. But a movie that has a really good story, so a really good, like let's say even a mystery or a thriller or something like that, that has, an intricate plot, but the characters are one note or they are, not very compelling. That film in the end, people are like, oh, well, it was interesting. I kind of, I liked it, but they won't love it. Like generally speaking, you won't love a film unless you don't have to identify with them. You just need to think the characters are interesting, right? You're like, wow, I really liked watching that person do that thing, whatever that is, because, and it has to do, obviously an actor's bringing a lot to that, but that's, that's going to come in the writing as well. Okay, so let me see. I'm kind of going around about trying to answer your question. I think, okay, so of all of the ideas, if you are pitching the NFB, I would say the first one. So
the Space Jam.
The Space Jam one. Because it's sort of absurd, it's interesting. There's I think there's a story there that can be built. Like you have to, obviously work on how you pitch that story, and pitching is a whole other podcast. How you pitch a compelling story to them. Like you should look up things like log lines, which are basically 1 or 2 sentence descriptions of what your film is. And then make it for whatever ideas. If you're ever playing around by yourself and you're like, oh, I want to think of a film idea, that's a good way to think of an idea. It's how do you tell the story in 2 lines that gives the person who's hearing it an understanding enough that they understand what the movie's about. Even they don't need to understand everything, but they're like, I get that movie, and they can be excited by it, and they can be interested in it, and they can get a taste of the characters as well in those lines. Cool. So that's if you're sending a tweet, it's actually a good example, right? So a tweet's generally that long. So if you're able to compress the idea down into a tweet, it's probably a pretty good log line. And so I think if again, it's to the audience. Who's the audience? The NFB. They can kind of do this, they do animation and live action. And I think that it can be compelling. Now, none of you are animators as far as I know, so that might be a hard sell. But as an idea, you can bring it up, and you can always hire animators. I think that one's good. It also, I can imagine it being shorter, right? So it's like that idea itself. It's another one of these ideas where it could be really long, or it can be. Like I can see it as a really funny short. She comes to his place and tells him that it's going to go on. Then we cut to he's training, and then he's doing this competition. In the end, the aliens end up destroying the planet anyway. So that one I can see working, and then the ideas at the end as shorts could also work, right? So. I think what would be the best one? Maybe The Last.
That's what I was thinking too.
Yeah, the one about the coming out story or love story, whatever you end up landing on, would probably be the ones that I would send to the NFB, because if they feel like films that they could be involved in some way. And I'm trying to say this realistically, right? It's like realistically, the NFB is generally speaking not going to get involved in feature films, like I said before, but they might get involved in a short. And if they're excited by something and think it's fun, like NFB, they have leeway, right? So it's like if they think something's fun and interesting and could actually, it's coming from Canadians and they're interested in supporting that, they might, as long as they may say, well, you need to find half of the funding somewhere else, right? Which is it's more likely that they would say something like that. So okay, that's that. Those are my answers. Is those two? I think the other ideas are really compelling and interesting and maybe worth exploring, but maybe not to the NFB. Like maybe that they're bigger. They feel like bigger ideas that would be you would need to be pitching somewhere else to see them get made.
If you or someone else who's a screenwriting professional who actually knows how the business works and what to do, out of the ideas that were presented, would you? I don't want to use the word steal, but I will. Would you steal any of those ideas? Are any of them worth a professional like developing further?
I think. Well, I mean, like I said, I could see films being made, but if you're asking me personally, I'm gonna probably say the You're Making a House a Home idea with the Syrian family, and that's probably because I'm coming from that perspective. A lot of the things that I've made have been about immigration, have been about either documented or undocumented immigrants, and what it means to be a Canadian but from another place. So that, when you pitch that idea originally, it's gonna that'll interest me right away. Like there's no doubt that that'll interest me. So yeah, I mean that's probably where I would go. For me, and coming from what I know, like the things that I know, I don't know anything about curling. So it wouldn't or like very little. And so I wouldn't think of that. That doesn't mean I wouldn't write a film about it, because all the time we write about things we don't know about all the time. But I find it compelling. Like it's an interesting idea. I would need to know. I'd need to see kind of examples of people from maybe not necessarily that community, or maybe the Muslim community. Like my family's, like half of my family's Muslim as well, so that interests me for that perspective. And so I'd be interested to see what the real examples of people from that community joining your community. And I don't know. I mean, my outsider's point of view about curling, it feels very white. Now you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like a very, very white thing.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I think that that's always interesting, right? It's like a group of people who aren't white, like people who are not white, entering a world that has been predominantly, if not exclusively, white. And that's like that is all that'll be compelling no matter what. So yeah, there you go.
Awesome. Well, we really appreciate this, Faisal. This has been a lot of fun. Tell people where they can find some of your stuff. Scott sent along some of your titles here that you've worked on, but where can people watch some of the stuff that you've written?
Absolutely. So I recently, somewhat recently, wrote an episode and worked on the show called Endlings. It's a half-an-hour sci-fi kid show about a bunch of kids who come upon an alien that is trying to save the last samples of species. So when species are going extinct, it tries to find those animals and kind of protect them. So it was a fun series to work on. I wrote an episode in the second season, which is on CBC and Hulu. So the second season hasn't been released yet. The first season is, though, and you can watch it. It's great, especially if you've got kids. It's a great show to watch with kids. And so you can find that in the States and Hulu, and Canada it's on CBC, and I think it's on CBC Gem here in Canada as well. And then before that, I was on a show called Ransom, which is it's on CBS, and it's on CBS All Access if you're in the United States. And in Canada, it was on Global, and I believe it's on their streaming platform, but I could be wrong. I haven't seen it, and it can be purchased as well on iTunes, etc., and so on. So yeah, those are the two last things I've worked on. I'm working on a bunch of things, but they're not made yet, so can't really talk about them too much.
Totally fair. And and in general, watch Canadian stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good.
Actually, if I'm going to plug something, a friend of mine has a show called Trickster, which she's a runner of, and it just came out yesterday, and you should watch it. It's a great show. It takes place in like an indigenous community. It's an indigenous lead. and it's getting a lot of really good reviews around the world. So it's excellent. It's on CBC Gem, and everyone should go see it.
Is that based on the book Son of Trickster?
Yeah, I believe so. Yes.
Yeah, that's on my table to read.
Oh, excellent. There you go.
Thank you everybody for joining us.
So there you have it. Our fun afternoon live stream with Rocks Across the Pond. And our thanks, of course, to Faisal Lutchmedial for joining us. And certainly check out all of his programming, all of his content that he plugged there at the end. The Endlings show really does sound pretty cool. I think I'm going to check that one out. So please do as well. So that'll do it for this week. Thank you, everybody, for listening. If you have not yet, please do subscribe to the show wherever it is you get your podcast. Do the likes, the ratings, all that fun stuff. Helps us grow the show, lets other people find out about it as well. And of course, if you like this, you might like our Monday live streams with the guys from Rocks Across the Pond every Monday afternoon, 5 o'clock Eastern time. So join us over there on Facebook for those. We tweet out the links to those every week, and it's the Game of Stones podcast Facebook page. So like the page, follow the page, and you can get updates on all the fun and frivolity over there. And of course, do subscribe to Rocks Across the Pond as well. If you want to let us know what you want to hear on the show, you can follow along on Twitter and Instagram at Game of Stones Pod. You can get in touch with us, Game of Stones Podcast at gmail.com, or you can head on over to gameofstonespod.com. We have all the episodes there. Also, we are selling the Game of Stones Podcast t-shirt, 3 colors, red, gray, and black, and all proceeds are going to Food Banks Canada, plus we are matching those proceeds. So it's like a double donation, and you get a t-shirt. So head on over to gameofstonespod.com for that. So thanks everybody for listening. Hope you enjoyed. We'll be back with you again next week. But until then, keep those brooms on the ice and don't dump that intern.
Make the final.